Today we have a really interesting panel of people who are presenting on the subject of legacies and futures, the challenges of. This is a subject that we are engaged in for the month of January and February, and we'll be picking it up in different ways through the spring. It's a very important subject for many, many reasons. One of which is that our world, which includes the United States and all the countries that are represented here, but includes global situations and global hotspots everywhere across the world, is in turmoil. A great deal of anger, fear, nervousness about the future is in the air. Another reason why this subject is extremely important is because we are at a time at the beginning of a year in which we think back, where are we and where do we need to go? And finally, in the loss of John Cobb, we are very much aware that we have inherited a legacy, and all the legacies that go before John and that sit with John, and that legacy suggests that we not stand still, that we move toward the future in a creative, transformative way. And so today we are featuring that subject with three very important leaders who work in different areas. The first speaker will be Jeff Wells. Jeff is a lead pastor of the Church of the Village, a progressive, radically inclusive, and anti-racist community in New York City. He preaches, practices, and promotes open, relational, and process theology. Jeff has been very active in public advocacy or public reflection on process-relational thought in relation to the way people live and the way churches and other faith communities engage with the world. He co-edited the book, Preaching the Uncontrolling Love of God, subtitled Sermons, Essays, and Worship Elements from the Perspective of Open, Relational, and Process Theology. Jeff is an active member of the Alliance for Ecological Civilization. In 2022, he helped found and co-chaired the Living Earth movement. With John Cobb Jr., he co-authored the book, Is International Cooperation Possible? A Bold Appeal for a Living Earth. Jeff has been engaged in this in his daily life, in his church, and in the public life of New York City. And Kathleen Reeves, Kat as many of us call her, is a healthcare chaplain. In fact, she's a healthcare chaplain right here at Pilgrim Place where I live, and I can say I see the beauty of her work every single day. She lives her care for others, and she blesses us as she goes along her way. Kat is an artist and a dedicated student of the Japanese tea ceremony through the International Chado Urasenke Tankokai. That's not right. How do you pronounce that? Kat, how do you pronounce?
You did great.
Oh, great. This is an association of the Urasenka School of Kyoto, Japan. She's also a published poet and writer with a deep exploration of mythopoetics. I happen to be in a poetry group with Kat, and in one of our recent sessions, we all share every week, and at one of our recent sessions, we were all astounded at the power of the poem she had shared. And someone said, Kat doesn't write poetry. Kat is a poem. And that's who she is. She is herself poetry. She has been featured in numerous journals, including River Poets Journal, C.G. Jung's journal, which is called Psychological Perspectives, and the Altadena Poetry Review Anthology, among others. So she's published her poems in many places. In her as a resistance, a novelty born through a creative response to oppression, strife, political unrest, war, and more. Ron Nahser is the founding provost, now emeritus president of Presidio Graduate School. This is the first school to offer an accredited MBA in sustainable management. So you're getting a theme here. Both Jeff and Ron are very deeply committed to eco-civilization and the many forms of ecological response in the world. And you'll see that also in Cat. He lives out his calling in various vocations, and here are a few. He has been an advertising executive, a teacher, an educational executive, and a scholar of American pragmatism. He's well known in China, and there he is professor of ecological economics and pragmatic inquiry at the Center for Confucian Entrepreneurship and East Asian Cultures. This is at Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, China. A recent issue of the journal Amplify carries an article that he co-authored. The name of the article is very important to Ron: Reclaiming Values and Vision in Management Education to Create Systems Change. Ron's accents on values and visions are the cornerstone of all his leadership. For example, he is senior fellow and director of urban sustainable management programs at the Institute for Nature and Culture of DePaul University's Department of Environmental Sciences and Studies. That's quite a mouthful, but you get the point that he's been in universities here and in China. He has been in corporate organizations, and he has been a teacher. And always these values and visions are at the center for him. Further, he lectures and consults with business and academic audiences in the US and internationally on matters of values, visions, and strategy. And so his visionary work is also turned quickly to strategy. We will begin with Jeff. Jeff Wells, thank you for being here, and you're on.
Thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth. First, I want to let everyone know that I am fairly new to process-relational theology. I, of course, knew about John Cobb and his work and knew a little. I had heard of process theology when I started seminary back in 2001, but I really didn't start delving into it in a serious way until 2019. And I'm so glad to see Bob Mesley on today, because it was Bob Mesley's Introduction to Process Theology, which was my first endeavor to understand what this really meant. And from that time on, even though I knew very little, I was already preaching process theology in the Church of the Village. And within a year after that, along with the other members of the pastoral staff who already had studied process theology, we made the decision to begin to teach that to the congregation. And it wasn't long after that that John Cobb came on Zoom with us and preached 3 Sundays in a row about discipleship. And I have to share those sermons with somebody, because John said at the time that was the first time he ever preached on discipleship, and he was really glad for the opportunity because it would help him to grow. That was when he was only 98 years old. Or maybe he was 97. Anyway, So it's a great privilege and honor for me to be able to come on today and to talk a little bit about John's legacy in particular, but the legacy of the many movements and organizations that he started or contributed to or influenced. And I want to start off because my focus is going to be on the role of faith communities and faith in individuals in addressing and facing the ecological crisis that confronts us today. And it it was John who was one of the very first people to recognize the need for an ecological theological perspective with his book, Is It Too Late? A Theology of Ecology in 1973. And he went on to help found the Institute for Ecological Civilization, which has been a very important source of knowledge and growth for me in my own journey. And I know that John had over the decades a huge and influence on or collaborated with so many key figures in in our attempts to address the ecological crisis and reverse the course that humanity has been on, including Bill McKibben and Mary Evelyn Tucker and David Korten, Vandana Shiva, and so many more people and organizations. So it's a huge legacy, but it's more than just a legacy. It's, I believe, a call forward for us, that we are called forward, and that was one of John's favorite terms. We are called forward to carry on that legacy and continue the work that needs to be done. In 2022, so I first came to Claremont and met with John in November of 2021, and he was already envisioning a new organization at that time, which didn't yet have a name, but he invited me to be a part of it. And I eventually became the co-chair with Bonnie Tarwater of the Living Earth movement, which was founded in early 2022. And I did that for a year. And then because the Living Earth movement decided to focus primarily on relations with China, which is a very important pursuit, but a few of us were much more passionate about promoting the vision of ecological civilization. David Korten and Andrew Schwartz and I got together and came up with the idea of creating a new organization, which eventually became called the Alliance for Ecological Civilization. And it's got a much bigger name than the reality of it, but it's about 20 people across the globe, including people like Jeremy Lenton, Vandana Shiva, and David Korten, and many others, who are of like mind in understanding that ecological civilization, the vision of ecological civilization, seems to us to be our best chance of saving not only humanity but saving the planet. And so we are currently working together on those things, and the influence of John and his legacy among all of those persons, I think, is helping us to come together and to come up with ways to move that forward. The Alliance for Ecological Civilization is very much tied to the Institute for Ecological Civilization. So Philip Clayton is also a member of our group, along with some theologians and activists and journalists, and so it's small, but I think it has a lot of potential to help draw other individuals and organizations together across the globe, and to find ways to really get this concept of ecological civilization into much wider public conversation. So let me move on to the question of futures. And I think that the reality is, and we have to face it, that things look pretty bleak. They look pretty bleak with the election of authoritarian leaders in many great places across the globe, including now in our own country, in the United States. The fact that the Trump administration and the MAGA movement are now in power are going to significantly delay efforts that were already being made to address climate change. And even those were much too little being done given the scale of the crisis that we're facing. So you may have seen the news, or maybe not, that because of the wildfires, the scientists believe that we have now actually gone above the 1.5 centigrade threshold that we were supposed to be avoiding by 2030. So we're already in a more advanced, dangerous situation than we anticipated being in by this point. I want to encourage everyone who, if you have not read it, to read Brian McLaren's most recent book, which is called Life After Doom. And I'll say that I think that Brian probably has the perspective that John Cobb often expressed, that he's hopeful but not optimistic. But Brian lays out 4 possible scenarios for what might happen going into the future regarding the ecological crisis. And I won't list them now, but I do encourage everyone to take a look at that book. It's, I think, a really important and powerful resource for all of us who are working to shift the direction of humanity and therefore the world in a healthier and sustainable direction. So I want to talk a little bit then about faith and religion related to that. Even though there have been some really important steps taken by religious traditions or denominations, I think none bigger than Laudato Si, the publication of Laudato Si by the Vatican, and its close alignment with the ideas around ecological civilization. But I don't see, even within the Catholic Church, I don't see that really being pushed in a big enough way. So. And the same is true, even though my denomination, the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterians, the Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, many other mainline denominations have taken stands for a more sustainable planet. Again, I don't see any of them calling the alarm with the kind of determination and consistency and loudness that I think is required by the situation that we're all facing. On the other hand, I do feel like process relational theology and open and relational theology, while we are yet quite small compared to Christianity overall, could provide a very important basis for moving forward if we were able to gain a wider hearing, because they both consistently recognize that the metaphysics the behind our reality is that we are all connected, that there is no separation between us and the rest of the living beings and even the rest of abiotic or non-living elements of the universe, and that that if we're going to survive, we have to live in harmony. As David Corton often says, there are no winners on a dead planet. So I'll just end by saying that I think the most important thing for me, and I think the most important thing for all of us as human beings, as conscious human beings who can understand the reality of our situation, but also can feel, I think, the sense that there's something more beyond us, that there's some bigger force, bigger energy, if you want to call it, or God, or whatever your particular inclination is toward that. I think that that we have to hold on to hope, because if we lose hope, then we'll fall into despair and not do anything. But I think there's good reason to hold on to hope also, because there is, in my own faith, there is a God who is continually working in us, in every living being, and even in every other element of the universe, to try to move us in the best possible direction. So we cannot predict how that might work out. We cannot predict how human beings might respond as the crisis continues to deepen, and we see even worse outcomes or worse consequences of the situation that we're in. So while I don't put a lot of hope in big hierarchical religious organizations, denominations, or faith traditions, I do think that there will be a lot of people who, based on their faith and their understanding and on their determination and resilience and hope, will rise up and look for the kinds of solutions that I think we're trying to promote.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was you've laid out a framework that has many challenges in it. Thank you. We'll come back and discuss it in a short while, but we'll turn now to Kat Reeves.
Hi, everyone. So the week before John Cobb died, we had many conversations, and I assured him that we would carry on his work. And although we never talked about art, I could see the potential in art from all the things that I've learned about process thinking. And you know, we find ourselves in a place where authoritarianism is growing. And so what we need to do before we can get anywhere is resist. And so I can see the potential of art in resistance. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. Okay. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of examples, and I only had room for so much. So if you're thinking of others, please put them in the chat as I'm sharing. So art is the original witness. Before laws, before governments, before organized religion, there was art. Paint scratched into cave walls, a means of remembering, of calling attention to what matters. Art has always been a mirror, a map, and a spell, reflecting the world as it is, charting paths to something better, and casting enchantments that move us to act. When injustice festers, art does not sit idle. It shapes, sculpts, and sings until the truth bursts forth. Authoritarians and oppressors want us to feel powerless. They put on a show, gaslight us, bombard us with rhetoric, and then we feel hopeless, helpless, and powerless. But as I say to my poetry group all the time, you are not without power. In fact, as a poet, you are more powerful than you know. Power, when I talk about power, I'm talking about strength in the face of oppressive power. So the power of art is that potential to change, to communicate. So that's the kind of power that stands up to the power of oppression and authoritarianism. And this is a painting by Diego Rivera called The Uprising from 1931. So art carries the unique power to communicate when other avenues are obstructed or compromised. In a world where news can be censored or distorted, art transcends barriers, offering a language that is universal and uncontainable. It can change minds, sow seeds of resistance, and archive the collective memory of a people long after official records have been erased. From the defiant brushstrokes of the fine artist to the piercing satire of editorial cartoons, art is not just a response to the world, but a catalyst to transform it. It invites reflection and sparks revolutions, reminding us that to create is to care, and to care is to resist. It is the people's power in the face of oppression. When Pablo Picasso painted Guernica, he did not create something beautiful in the traditional sense. Instead, he gave us the ugliness of war laid bare, the dismembered bodies, the anguished faces, the haunting light of bombs. The painting is a howl, a wound made visible, demanding not just to be seen, but to be felt. It was a response to the Spanish Civil War, yet it reverberates across all conflicts, reminding us that war does not spare innocence. Guernica is not simply a painting, it's a portal that draws us into the suffering that we too often distance ourselves from. It whispers that justice begins when we look directly at the pain we'd rather avoid. Paintings are not always beautiful and not always silent. No one can deny Guernica to the face of Picasso. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago is a reckoning. It stitches together countless voices, survivors of Stalin's labor camps, into a tapestry of truth that refuses to unravel. Here is art as testimony, as a lantern held aloft in the darkest corners of human history. After the KGB had confiscated Solzhenitsyn's materials in Moscow during 1965 and 1967, he worked to develop his preparatory drafts of the Gulag Archipelago into a finished transcript. And he accomplished some of this while hiding at his friends' homes in the Moscow region and elsewhere. And the truth was suppressed, but it existed in hiding in the shadows, transported through a story that would emerge into the light eventually. Solzhenitsyn's prose does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. His words remind us that injustice flourishes in silence, but stories, when spoken or written, have the power to puncture that silence and expose the rot beneath. His work stands as a testament, even when systems of oppression try to erase humanity, art preserves it. Music, ephemeral yet unforgettable, carries injustice in its melodies and resistance in its rhythms. Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, haunting and raw, forces listeners to confront the barbarity of lynching, an unflinching hymn of sorrow and rage. Why did the Federal Bureau of Narcotics' Harry Anslinger assign an agent to track Holiday when she refused to stop speaking about racism, because she was powerful. Her music was powerful. And I asked Richard to post the lyrics in the chat. And We Shall Overcome is more than a song. It's a beacon of hope that lit the path of the civil rights movement. Rooted in African-American spirituals and gospel tradition, the song was embraced by activists as a rallying cry for equality and justice. The power of We Shall Overcome lay in its ability to unite diverse voices, echoing the collective resilience of those fighting against segregation and systemic racism. Pete Seeger, a towering figure in folk music, used his voice and banjo as tools for peace and social justice. From his early days in the labor movement to his later work as an anti-war activist, Seeger's music carried messages of unity, resistance, and hope. Songs like Where Have All the Flowers Gone and If I Had a Hammer became anthems for peace and equality, transcending cultural and political divides. Seeger's gentle yet relentless advocacy for disarmament and environmental stewardship amplified his belief in the power of collective action, refusing to be silenced during moments of political persecution. Seeger remained steadfast, showing that music could be both a weapon against injustice and a bridge towards understanding. His legacy continues to inspire those who dream of a more harmonious and equitable world. And Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind does not provide answers. Instead, it asks questions that linger, that haunt, that demand action. Music, like a river, moves through communities, gathering voices, uniting hearts. It's not a background to a protest, but a protest in itself, singing truths that cannot be silenced. Probably the most famous sequence of The Great Dictator is the 5-minute speech that concludes the film. Here, Charlie Chaplin drops his comic mask and speaks directly to the world, conveying his view that people must rise up against dictators and unite in peace. Chaplin wields his comedic platform to transcend mere entertainment, delivering a searing critique of authoritarianism while rallying his audience around the values of humanity, equality, and freedom. The satirical framework of the film disarms viewers, creating an opening for the speech's heartfelt and impassioned plea to resonate on a deeper level. By contrasting the dehumanizing rigidity of machine men with the boundless creativity and compassion inherent in humanity, Chaplin connects his critique of totalitarian regimes to universal values, inspiring courage and solidarity. Satire has long been a tool for holding power to account, and figures like Mark Twain and Will Rogers wielded it masterfully. Twain's works, such as The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, used humor and irony to critique issues like racism, imperialism, and human folly. His sharp observations pierced through the facade of social norms, inviting readers to confront uncomfortable truths about their world. Similarly, Will Rogers, known as Oklahoma's favorite son, delivered biting and folksy humor. His quips about politicians, "I don't make jokes, I just watch the government and report the facts," remain as relevant today as they were in his time. And in our modern times, sometimes the most incisive critics come not through solemnity, but through laughter. Satire, like a scalpel, cuts through hypocrisy and exposes the raw nerve of truth. Jon Stewart, during his years on The Daily Show, wielded comedy like a weapon, pointing it at the absurdity and cruelty of power. Following in his footsteps, Stephen Colbert carved out his own satirical niche with the Colbert Report by embodying a caricature of a bombastic right-wing pundit. Colbert used humor to expose the absurdity of political hypocrisy, corporate influence, and media bias. Colbert's wit, coupled with his deep understanding of the issues he mocked, ensured that his satire was not just entertaining, but enlightening. His famous truthiness segment encapsulated the zeitgeist of an era increasingly disconnected from facts, proving that satire could illuminate even as it entertained. And poetry. Poetry does not merely describe the injustice, it makes us feel it in our bones. Langston Hughes, Let America Be America Again, aches with the unfulfilled promise of equality, while Maya Angelou's Still I Rise radiates a defiant hope. Poems distill what prose sometimes cannot capture. They are lightning in a bottle, a spark that sets the mind ablaze. And in the face of injustice, poetry serves as both a balm for the wounded and a battle cry for the warriors. One of my very favorite poets is Ferlinghetti. Lawrence Ferlinghetti wrote a poem, I am waiting for my case to come up, and I am waiting for a rebirth of wonder. And I'm waiting for someone to really discover America and wail. And I'm waiting for the discovery of a new symbolic Western frontier, for the American eagle to really spread its wings and straighten up and fly right. And I am waiting for the age of anxiety to drop dead. And I am waiting for the war to be fought, which will make the world safe for anarchy. And I am waiting for the final withering away of all governments. And I am waiting for a rebirth of wonder. And I don't have time to read another poem called Pity the Nation, but I encourage you to look it up. It's an amazing poem by Ferlinghetti. So the tradition of poetry isn't new. The Irish Rosk poets, dating back to the ancient Celtic bards, was a form of satire so biting that it was said to curse its subjects. Rosk poets were feared and revered, their verses serving as both public critique and divine judgment. To be placed in the crosshairs of a Rosk was to be publicly called out, to have one's deeds, hypocrisies, and failures laid bare for the community to see. And this poetic tradition underscores satire's roots in a communal accountability. It wasn't about personal vendettas. It was about protecting the moral fabric of the society, ensuring that no one, king or commoner, was beyond scrutiny. The enduring power of satire lies in its ability to embarrass power into reconsideration, where through the biting wit of the Rosk poet or the pen strokes of a modern cartoonist, satire levels the playing field. It disrupts the aura of invincibility around those who wield power unjustly and hands the tools of critique to the people. By making the powerful absurd, it disarms them, reducing their pretensions to rubble. Satire is one of the oldest forms of justice making in art, wielding ridicule, humor to expose hypocrisy, corruption, and abuse of power. And I want to share, I did a weekend with somebody from Ireland who is an expert in Rosk poetry and the history of it. And she shared that the television show called Father Ted, it might be a BBC production, that it significantly changed how many Irish people viewed the church by satiring its authority and presenting priests, particularly in rural Ireland, as flawed and often incompetent characters, allowing people to laugh at the church in a way that was previously considered taboo, thus contributing to a more relaxed and critical perspective on religious institutions. And this affected the church's hold and authority over the people. Little cracks in the system, potentialities. So to place a satire on someone in ancient times was not merely to mock, It's to hold them accountable, to say, we see what you're doing and we will not let it go unnoticed. From the ancient Irish bards to the editorial pages of modern newspapers, satire reminds us of our collective responsibility to demand better from those in power. And in a world where truth is increasingly muddied, satire cuts through the precision, with the precision of a scalpel, making the incomprehensible visible and the unjust undeniable. And Telnays, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist for the Washington Post. You might have heard of this it was a few months ago, or maybe just last month. She resigned after her editorial work was rejected, and I have it here in the slide, a decision that underscores the fraught tension between artistic expression and corporate interests. And she targeted Jeff Bezos, her boss, in her rejected comic, and she laid bare the conflict of interest that can silence critical voices, even those traditionally celebrated for challenging the status quo. Like many of her peers, she used her pen to target hypocrisy and social myopia. Her work reminds us that humor isn't just entertainment, it's resistance, and it's powerful. So artists are more powerful than they realize, for they are the secret bearers of truth in a world often shrouded in darkness. In the depths of uncertainty, it is the artist who channels the universal pulse of creativity, offering glimpses of light and truth that often guide humanity forward. Art is not static. It is alive. It's a process, a conversation that never ends. Just as like art is not a finished product, but a practice, an ongoing act of creating balance in a world perpetually tilting. Whether it's a late night comedian or a poet like Langston Hughes or a Saturday Night Live, it could be a song or a poem. Art reminds us that we are not powerless. We are participants in the weaving of justice. And there are powerful voices, ones that will ring through history and inspire the future. And so my final slides are some pictures by Banksy, who is called a guerrilla artist. And he shows up in places and posts and paints his graffiti style art. And this is one from Palestine with the Dove of Peace wearing the bulletproof vest with the mark, the scope mark on his chest. And then I asked Richard to share a 1-minute video.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so very much, Kat. I invite you to take a deep breath, absorb what Kat has offered, and then we will move to Ron. Ron Nahser.
All right. Well, I'm still taking it all in. I'm still breathing or attempting to breathe. It's an honor to follow these two. I do want to pick up a couple of themes in the time that I've got. The first one is that when you concluded, Kat, with we think too much and feel too little, you nailed it. And so did Jeff with his comment about uh, there's no business there are no winners on a dead planet. Well, the other earlier quote was there's no business to be done on a dead planet. And so that's my theme is economics. And the first thing I wanted to say was that in terms of legacy, and Mary Elizabeth said it, and we've all said it in different ways, the legacy is to carry it on. And so I want to talk about John Cobb and say that, first of all, why his work has inspired me in economics. And this is going to be a little dull reading, I'm afraid, but what I wanted to say is that as Mary Elizabeth said, my career has been through advertising. So when you talk about messaging and the power of art, I know all about that. That's what we do in advertising. We call attention to these problems. That's why I've often said the reason why I'm so pleased to be in this field is because, in my opinion, the eco-civilization has been the worst marketed idea since Galileo and Copernicus tried to say we have a heliocentric world, not a human-centric world. So it's a question of getting the better story out. And I've searched around through my career to say, is it economics? And so I want to start with John Cobb and this book, which was published. It's a series of essays that he did, but I'm unfortunately going to read, it's going to take me just a moment. You quoted Charlie Chaplin. Well, I'm going to quote John Cobb. And his line was, during the 70s, I was preoccupied with the realization when he talked about all that with the concern about the environment. But he said then, but I was troubled that even as beliefs and attitudes improved, the objective situation grew worse. No kidding. So what did he do? I came to the conclusion that the course of events on the planet is primarily determined by the economy. Yes. That's what gave me the ground to say, well, okay, Ron, you're an ad guy and you're going to do some more commercials, or is this really foundational? And I have the authority of John to say this is foundational. I saw the economy as little affected by these improvements in thought, and until economic thinking has changed, other changes would be of minimal effect. I became convinced that practical economic thinking follows the lines laid down by standard economic theory, and this must be challenged. Then he talks about the story of how that was led to his then talking, and I didn't know where the book, I was familiar with the book. I really wasn't that familiar with John Cobb, but I certainly was familiar with Herman Daly. And I'll talk about him in a moment, but I was very familiar with this book. And one of the great moments was when at one of these morning meetings, and I'll mention this toward the end, but I asked John about, well, I assume because the book, if you read through it, some of it is very religious, some of it is more economic. He said, and I said, I can tell which chapters who wrote what. And he said, no, no, Ron, we wrote that line by line together. So I'm holding this book up as a critical attempt to try to bring together theology and religion, which is in economics, which is going to be my my concluding point. I'm going to race through this very quickly, but my beginning was back in college. I'm wearing my Notre Dame Sorin College sweater to remind myself that as I was a junior and senior in college, I read this book, Adventure of Ideas, trying to understand philosophy. And this was the line that got me. It said, the behavior of the community is largely dominated by the business mind. A great society is a society in which its men and women of business think greatly of their function. I read that at 22 years old and I went, that's a pretty good idea. I'm now decades later reading John Cobb saying economics is the heart of it. I'm going, okay, well, all these years haven't been wasted, but what are we doing? Are we helping to make this attempt that Jeff and Kat have laid out? So what happened next was that I go along through life, And I'm in advertising, trying to understand the power of messaging. And I ended up finally studying, getting my master's in religious studies, studying alternate economic systems with a group of nuns who had worked in poverty all over the world, the BVMs. And I went, Gandhian economics, Meister Eckhart preaching to the merchants of Cologne in the 13th century. And so this all really was a great way, which led finally to my coming to this idea of pragmatism, a way of thinking. How can we be pragmatic? And what it led me is that your concepts, don't tell me your concepts, show me your action, and I'll tell you what your concepts and beliefs are. And what I think we're going through now is if you look at Trump and the people, they have a worldview of fight, fight, fight. That is their worldview. And it's tied in eventually with can we rethink the economic model? So I ended up doing my dissertation on reclaiming the pragmatism of Peirce, Royce, James, and Dewey. And I'll get to Whitehead in a moment about that. And so I found pragmatism as a way of thinking, and it led me then to economics finally. And that's when I came to this book, Ecological Economics, which is Cobb, Daly, and Farley. And I never met Herman Daly, but I sure spent a lot of time with Josh Farley at Vermont. And we talked a lot about economics. And so I felt more and more emboldened that this was the leverage point in the thinking that went into how we come up with the concepts of economics. So that then led to Presidio. And I get a call one day, and they were starting this new program. I was at DePaul. I'd been there for a number of years as their executive in residence and teaching this stuff and working with students, trying to say, okay, how are you thinking about the business model? And we were trying to bring in business ethics was the big idea. We need more ethical thinking in business. And I looked at that and I went, too thin, not going to sell. I understand. And so one of my mentors said, well, Ron, you might look at pragmatism. And I said immediately, I don't even know what pragmatism means, but I can sell it. Everybody wants to be pragmatic. And so I went, okay, this is a good idea. But then I find out it is a deep philosophy originally coined by Charles Sanders Peirce, and William James picked it up, and John Dewey and others. And I'm in Chicago, and one of our great heroes is Jane Addams. And she worked with John Dewey when he was at Chicago. And Dewey often said he learned more about pragmatism working with Jane Addams than he did anywhere else, because she was actually doing it, helping to make the conditions better. So I thought, okay, well, I'm on to something here. There's a lot of history to this, and it's making a lot of sense. So we started this. So they asked me to then run launch this MBA program, and I said, okay, we are going to bring together this idea, and the founder, the original visionary, had gotten his master's of divinity. He was an ex-advertising creative director, and here I am, advertising marketer, head of an agency, and his line was, only disciplined reflection on experience leads to learning that lasts. And I went, look at the evidence. And the pragmatists always say, look at the evidence. I'll come to that in a conclusion in just a moment. So we launched the program, and we right now are we have Little Presidio. I was provost for 4 years, and I quit in a fight with the board and went back to DePaul, where I fell in with the theologians, and we developed a program. So I developed this idea of urban sustainable management programs and an MS in sustainable management. The problem was that at a big university, so I went from a school of 225 students to a school of 25,000 students. It gets chopped up into pieces. I'm going to conclude on that when I get to finally John Cobb and Whitehead. So where we are now, they've asked me to come back to Presidio because Presidio has been taken over by University of Redlands, which is just east of Claremont. And we are now housed in the seminary, San Francisco Theological Seminary, where Dick Gray got his Master's of Divinity degree in 1973, and 7 years later founded World College West, which became Presidio World College. We are now housed in a seminary. We are now trying to put together the seminary and the faculty of a business school. And it's a little bit of a rough go, but we're attempting to make the connection process theology and process philosophy. The basic idea, as I'm now up to 9 minutes, the basic idea is that we want the students, the faculty has kind of said they don't quite all talk the same language, but one group has said, well, our people come into the divinity program and they have these ideas to talk to God and be more religiously based, but they don't have much of an idea of the real world. And the real world students come in and they don't have much of an idea of this deep thinking and calling idea. So I love to try the idea of calling on the seminary students and calling on the business students. Talk about the yin and the yang. Oh my gosh. So we're attempting to try to bridge that and say, finally, whatever your starting point is, you finally have to say, this is what I believe. You know, we have a lot of problems with trying to get them as I love the line where we think too much and feel too little, because finally it is about a feeling. Now you're into the soft stuff, Ron. We do spreadsheets here, and it comes down to a number. Yes, it does come down to a number, but how did you get there, and what is the context of it? What beliefs are driving it? And that's the basic point that we have. So I'll conclude with this: that I think Jay McDaniel, I hope is on the call. I finally had to wrestle with this. And I had, with a PhD in moral philosophy, I had read a lot of Whitehead over the years, with his classic line in here, further in this book that I read before. The other line that he had in here was philosophy, I memorized it. Philosophy is an attempt to clarify those fundamental beliefs which finally determine the emphasis of attention that lies at the base of character. And I thought, that's it. So we asked both business students and theologians, it comes faster to them, but to finally say, what do you really believe? What is it? And so I will conclude with this, and I thank Jay for this. He finally did enough work with me that I could read through it. Whitehead concludes with this line: the chief danger to philosophy is narrowness in the selection of evidence. I went, that's it. So what we find out is that in this last election, people were concerned about the price of eggs. Trump is presiding over the highest level of employment in our history. There's some idea in the last election, income inequality and the environment were almost not mentioned at all. That is not the narrowness in the selection of evidence. So all we're trying to do is to have people have a systems view. And John Cobb, I can't thank you enough for blessing the values of driving finally to rethinking the economy. So thank you.
Oh my, another wow. Wow, wow, and wow to all of you. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it now for the three of you. Maybe we could get all three of you on the screen. Richard's always ahead of me. I'd like to open it for the three of you to identify with one another what struck you in the others' presentations. What did you find important for us to hear?
Oh, right. Well, I've already commented on the two of you, but each one of you had quotable quotes. So I just can't thank you enough to try tying them together. But this idea of we think too much and feel too little. We're working on this whole idea of left brain, right brain, heart and head, gut. And where does it come from? We always hear from the students, well, I don't know if there's a God or not. Well, do you feel something? Well, yes, I feel. Do you feel, oh, and we've had more students lay out, we do a thing on a systems map. We say, okay, you're interested, you're concerned about food or women's education or whatever it is, lay out the system. They go, oh my God, this is all screw. There's one student, wonderful young woman, she drew a picture of the fashion industry and she went, oh my God, it's all bleeped up. I went, no kidding. So we think there's great power in the art of trying to lay out some sort of comprehensive view. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think, these topics are not separate. They're all, we have to work together and, we're all facing the same thing. And I think that trying to find hope in resistance, in churches, in understanding economics, it's all empowering.
I was really grateful for what you presented, Kat, because it feels like something that we do all the time in the Church of the Village, because we recognize that people respond to things in different ways. So some people will respond to the message, the words that we're saying in worship, but other people are going to not respond to that so much as they're going to respond to images or to the music, and we often use poetry in worship and other kinds of readings from Rumi or Hafiz or so that's something that I think I wouldn't say that it's necessarily tied to a process relational perspective, but process relational perspective can certainly help open one to those possibilities. And Ron, I was really happy to hear what you said. I think that we have to have a huge focus on economics, because the real driver behind the ecological crisis is, in my mind, is capitalist economics, and I don't think, and capitalism feels right now like a steamroller that's inexorably rolling over us and delaying and preventing the moves that really need to be made to create an ecological civilization. But I also believe that as the consequences of climate change and other crises related to the environmental crisis, as those consequences become even more dire, my hope is that people will wake up. I think, unfortunately, I think that we are not going to avoid some really horrific and horrible suffering on parts of for large parts of humanity. But perhaps as capitalist civilization begins to collapse globally, we'll have enough people wake up in time to turn things around. I also wanted to say, Ron, I appreciate your point about thinking too much and not feeling enough. But I think that it's possible to put a different spin on that and say it's not either one of those, but that both are thinking, for too many people, both our thinking and our feeling are directed only at ourselves. They're selfish and greedy, as opposed to having an interest in working for the common good, the common thriving of all, not just human beings, but I would say all creatures and all of living systems.
Well, Jeff, I'm so happy you said that, because what I've been working on, and again, I didn't want to start quoting line by line, but later on in this book, which is really kind of a Bible for me, for the common good, he talks about how we embrace the market system. We think it's a great way to allocate resources, and it is. But the idea that I think the reason why I got hired to run Presidio is finally this founder ad guy turned to me. He said, what's the meaning of marketing to you, Ron?" And I said, "To serve." He said, and eventually he said, "You're hired," eventually. But it was that idea. Marketing is supposed to serve the needs of society. That's why when I got into advertising, I thought, wait a minute, we're doing brain surgery. This is important. But we need to, so they would bring me into different nonprofit organizations. And I finally determined simply the people with a better vision were terrible marketers, and the marketers had no vision. And I went, oh, why don't we put the two of those together in some way to understand how we genuinely serve? So our line was, every market, every commons. That's why the ecological civilization is essentially a market. Oh, you've just desecrated the civilization. No, it's how people exchange goods and services. And I always love the line from who was it? One of the great anthropologists. She said, "If I had 1 hour or one day to spend with any culture, I would spend the first half of the day in the marketplace.
Mm.
Excuse the distraction of my moving around. I had my battery was about to go, so I needed to get to a plug. I want to open this conversation to the larger community because the kind of issues you're discussing among each other are ones that really tap deeply into what we broadly are thinking. So